A horrific scene in Florida on Saturday. A white man armed with a high-powered rifle and a handgun killed 3 black people at a dollar store in Jacksonville before shooting himself. Local law enforcement describing the shocking scene as a racially motivated crime. Police say the killer had written several manifestos detailing his hatred for black people. The senseless act of violence now being investigated as a hate crime.
There's no question about it. He hated blacks, and I think he hated just about everyone that wasn't white.
Another somber day in the USA. This time, Jacksonville, Florida, grieving the loss of 3 innocent people, gunned down because of the color of their skin.
Speechless and still processing at this point, just still processing.
Police say the murderer knew exactly what he was doing when he opened fire at a dollar store in Jacksonville, Florida on Saturday. He had authored several manifestos for his parents, the media, and law enforcement, detailing his hatred for black people. Investigators also say before the gunman arrived at the Dollar General, he showed up in the parking lot of a historically black university nearby and was turned away by security for refusing to identify himself.
I want to make sure people understand that he is completely accountable. He understood what he was doing. Based upon the things that I've read, he understood what he was doing, and he understood why he was doing it.
After killing 3 people, the murderer, Ryan Christopher Palmeter, texted his father.
At 1:18, the suspect texts his father and says, "Use a screwdriver to get into my room." The father enters the room and finds a last will and testament of the suspect along with a suicide note on his laptop.
He then killed himself. The shooting occurred as the Jacksonville community prepared for an annual commemoration of what is known as Axe Handle Saturday. In an unforgettable exhibition of brutality 63 years ago, a mob of white people used baseball bats and axe handles to club peaceful black demonstrators protesting segregation at a downtown lunch counter on August 27, 1960.
We must say clearly and forcefully that white supremacy has no place in America.
Sitting with civil rights leaders today, U.S. President Joe Biden addressed the racist act in Jacksonville.
We can't let hate prevail, and it's on the rise. It's not diminishing. Silence, I believe, as we've all said many times, silence is complicity. We're not going to remain silent.
Our country was founded on many noble principles, and I believe each of us has a duty to not allow factions to sever our unity.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis speaking out against the violence too.
Florida, the state, and its people condemn the horrific racially motivated murders perpetrated by a deranged scumbag in Jacksonville at the Dollar General store. Perpetrating violence of this kind is unacceptable, and targeting people due to their race has no place in the state of Florida.
But he was heckled while speaking at a vigil for the victims.
We are not going to allow these institutions to be targeted by people.
Let me tell you, we finna put parties aside, cause it ain't about parties today. A bullet don't know a party. If the governor wanted to come here and he bringing gifts to my community, y'all know I'm taking the gifts, because we've been through enough already.
Police say the killer was briefly held under a state law called the Baker Act in 2017, which states a person can be taken to a receiving facility for involuntary examination during a mental health crisis. Yet his guns were legally purchased. Joining us now is criminologist and senior consultant at CGI Sarah Daly. Sarah, we're hearing that the shooter was at one point the subject of the state's Baker Law. Can you explain what that is and how it might prevent someone from having access to guns?
Sure. The Baker Act is a way to provide individuals with emergency mental health services and temporary detention for up to 72 hours if they're suspected of having a mental illness and they may pose a threat to themselves and others. So it's really keeping them safe as well as other people in the community. So having a record of this should prevent someone from legally purchasing firearms, although after the fact, people can petition a court to restore their eligibility. So we'll need more information about how this perpetrator was able to purchase these firearms this year. And based on reports, it seems that there were no red flags during his background check.
Have we seen an increase in racially motivated shootings in the U.S. recently?
Yeah, a tragedy like this reminds us of kind of similar racially motivated shootings like the one we saw in Buffalo last year, or the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston last year, or I'm sorry, previous years. But we've also seen hate crimes committed against the LGBT community and Asian groups and Jewish communities. And while these are really high profile cases, there are so many more instances of hate speech and kind of small scale violence that occur every day. So it's something that as a country, Americans need to reckon with and say collectively that it's going to take everyone demanding that this is not something that we'll tolerate. Whether that comes through gun control legislation or prevention-oriented approaches, there has to be a breaking point.
Governor Ron DeSantis was booed when he tried to speak to a crowd in Jacksonville. What do you think this says about how people are feeling about certain gun-related policies?
For many people and communities, there's kind of increasing concern about how the presidential election next year will affect marginalized communities in this country, especially when there are candidates who have historically used racially charged language to drum up support for their campaign. So it has the power to sway people who may have already been on the edge or espoused these hateful views. But it's why we always say that words matter, that this rhetoric of hate can inspire or motivate people to commit targeted violence, and it has to stop. So the people booing can and should express their frustration and disgust, but it has to be met with support for what they did and what the message that they're sending. And it may also invigorate DeSantis supporters. I think people are recognizing that there are areas and state governments that are not doing all that they can and should to protect its citizens. And I think this is reflecting that. But I think we're also, regardless of state level leadership, I think we're still seeing these acts of violence. So they go hand in hand, but I don't think it's the only cause.
This shooter, like many before him, left behind manifestos detailing his hate. Why do this?
Essentially, people who do commit these acts of violence typically have suicide as a possible outcome or a likely outcome. But for many people like this, it gives their suicide, their death, a purpose. So rather than dying alone in their home, they're dying with what they believe to be a noble cause.
Thanks so much for joining us, Sarah.
Thank you.